Well, welcome everyone. I'm Kathleen McMahon, and I'm here today to show you how accessibility-flavored React components can make your design system delicious. Before we begin, let's get some details out of the way. My slide deck will be posted on Noticed after this talk, including resources and that I briefly touch upon, along with some links. The full URL will be available later on Twitter. The quick URL for now is https://noti.st/resource11. You can also follow me at Resource11 on Twitter, Instagram, and GitHub. Now, here's an outline of what we're going to be covering today. Yes, there is an agenda. Why accessibility first? Design systems are a cookbook. Design systems and React. We'll also talk about icons, buttons, inputs, and disclosure widgets. And we'll wrap up with some tips on documentation. Let's back up a bit so I can introduce myself a little bit better. I'm a principal engineer at Car Gurus, and I race bikes very badly. Mostly, you'll see me in costume racing 2 laps to your 6 at the back of the pack on a single speed bike. Mostly. Unless something happens, like a pandemic kicking in our doors. Hello, COVID. Then your racing season is postponed. So while I'm an engineer and a super slow bike racer, I'm also a dev dinosaur. And I find it fascinating to see how far we've come from the tools we've had for computing and software and storage, reference material, and browsers. While our browser choices were minimal back then, Netscape anyone, our stack has stood the test of time: HTML, CSS, JavaScript. Fast forward to now, and the industry is moving at a really fast pace. And it can feel overwhelming to keep up, much less find the place where you can thrive, especially if you have both design and engineering skills and love that fundamental stack. But fear not. Dinosaurs are always the hotness. Those old school HTML, CSS, and JavaScript skills are highly valuable and transferable, no matter which framework you use. And these skills will give you an edge in the industry where the div has become the reluctant king. So before working at Car Gurus, I was the tech lead for the O'Reilly Media design system team. I learned a lot about streamlining component libraries during my time there. If you've ever worked on a design system, you know that there are a lot of things to consider. And you should remember that great design systems combine 2 key factors: user experience, or designer or developer experience, and the end user experience, the people that are seeing what you are creating with your design system. However, creating a design system can be tough with so many moving parts. If you are rebooting a design system, you have to choose what to tackle first. If your design system team is small, you have to be very strategic. For example, if there is any business logic in your components, your first priority should be to extract that out and build your components with accessibility in mind. Fix your colors, then your components, then reboot your docs. You may ask, why accessibility first? Well, our users have varied needs, and because so often accessibility is what is handled last, which sends a poor message to our users. If you've read the WebAIM Million report, the results are depressing. With the amount of errors found on pages, unlabeled inputs, unnecessary attributes added to elements, we are making the web worse in the name of good intentions. While we have things like the web content accessibility guidelines to follow, which is a really low bar to set, we have been missing the mark in the industry when it comes to making sure all of our users can use our apps. Imagine, though, if you had accessibility baked into some commonly used components. A design system is the perfect place for this. I like to say your design system is a cookbook. And cookbooks have personality. My mom is a serious fan of cooking. And lately, I've been enjoying digging through the cookbooks she's collected over the years and reading how the recipes have evolved over time. If you take a look at some of the cookbooks published in the 1960s and look past the outdated views, you'll find some interesting recipes, questionable food choices that combine Jell-O and meat, not my favorite, but also you'll see an impressive level of detail paid to every single part of the cooking process. There's even a section on table settings and entertaining. This is very similar to how a design system works. Now, what does that have to do with React? There's always some debate about how using a JavaScript framework creates inaccessible apps. Yet, React fully supports building accessible websites by using standard HTML and CSS techniques. A better way to think of React is to consider it a kitchen utensil. It is not the only utensil in your kitchen. You are the cook. In my opinion, it is up to the developer to have that standard HTML, CSS, JavaScript, and accessibility knowledge to be able to leverage a utensil correctly, and that includes React. That said, if your developers are unsure how to start building inclusive apps, empower them with your design system. Build some features into your components to help them along. Then you can start celebrating when your coworkers make those apps accessible without you having to ask for it. Your components are your tried and true recipes, and WCAG is your reference material. Creating a component is like following a recipe. You start off with your high quality ingredients, that's your semantic HTML. Mix in your seasonings, just a touch of ARIA attributes. Follow the directions, that's your documentation. And read the helpful hints, those are your best practices. Let's take those principles and apply them to some components. Starting with icons. Icons can be either informative or decorative. If the icon is informative, it needs to be paired with descriptive text. Decorative icons need to be hidden from assistive technology because they don't add significant value to your app to be announced. There is more than one way to create an accessible icon. Two of the most recent ways are SVGs and icon fonts. At O'Reilly, we initially used SVG icons in our design system. We combined them all into a sprite sheet. Yet we ran into some problems when we started testing. We discovered a bug in Safari when testing on High Sierra using VoiceOver, where the assistive technology would announce every single one of those 100 or so icons in that sprite sheet. It made me sad. So we had to think fast and find a different solution. We converted all our icons into a font set for the time being and chose to revisit SVG icons later, since that High Sierra bug has now been fixed. Let's go over an example of how we make an accessible icon component using semantic HTML and the icon font technique. This is what you typically see as an icon font pattern in the wild, but it's not accessible. This is an accessible icon pattern. Let's break it down. The span containing our icon font has been sprinkled with a pinch of ARIA hidden equals true to hide the icon font from screen readers. The second span contains the descriptive name for our icon. And a visually hidden class has been added to that span. This will remove the visual presentation of that text, yet keeps that text available to screen readers. In the wrapping span, we use a CSS class to convert the span's native display property from inline to inline block. This way, we can support margin and padding customization on all 4 sides of the element rather than just on the left and the right. Notice that spans are being used for all 3 elements here. This is on purpose for when we pair this component with a button later. Now, before we refactor this component into React, let's consider whether this icon is informative or decorative. If our icon is informative, it should announce. Therefore, we keep our markup as is. If our icon is decorative, we'd add this aria hidden attribute and set it to true to that wrapping span to ensure the entire group of spans is not announced to the screen reader. Now that we have an accessible icon pattern, let's pop this into a functional component and convert this to JSX syntax. Change that class to class name, convert that true string to a Boolean value, and self-close that empty span. And voila, now this is an ecstatic component, icon component in JSX that is accessible. However, let's make this component more flexible and expand the syntax to support 3 incoming props: icon hidden, icon name, icon title, and add some guardrails. It's important to create guardrails for your components so you can be always sure that your developers are using the accessibility features you've mixed in. For our icon component, we've added 3 guardrails. Our first guardrail is the naming guardrail. We've set up a check to see if the icon name the developer passes in is in our icon library. If that icon does not exist in our library, the component does not render in the app. The second guardrail we set is to ensure if the developer doesn't pass in the descriptive text to that icon title prop, the icon's default name will always be exposed as a fallback. The last guardrail is the icon hidden prop. If the developer passes in icon hidden of true, the containing spans will render in the DOM with an aria hidden equals true attribute attached. If no icon hidden prop is passed in, the aria hidden attribute isn't attached to the wrapping span at all when it's rendered in the DOM. This way, we are guaranteeing that the icon will read out to screen readers no matter what, unless the developer purposely specifies otherwise by passing in that icon hidden value. This true or null pattern works very well with HTML attributes that only need to be added if the value exists. Aria hidden is one of those. You may be saying, but what about SVGs? What if I haven't created my own custom icon set? Well, there are great options out there to do this with SVGs as well, like Font Awesome. Font Awesome is still a great option for this. In fact, Font Awesome now has an official React component that you can use. And this library has been built with accessibility in mind. It's pretty straightforward to use this component, and it adds the right properties for you under the hood by default. There is a slight bug, however, if you want to use this component as a standalone informative icon. Say you want your icon to announce as a beverage in this case, and you pass in that aria label prop. Yes, that aria label will render to the SVG element. However, because that SVG element already has an aria hidden equals true attribute attached, that aria label will do nothing here. However, if you want, you can get around this by using the icon component we just built, and you can swap out the span that uses the CSS class and swap in that Font Awesome icon component. Then you can leverage that visually hidden span to make your icon informative. Moving on to buttons. Buttons perform an action on the page. They should look and act like a button, and buttons get screen reader and keyboard functionality for free. Our high quality ingredient here is the button element. We're going to sprinkle just a touch of aria here in the form of an aria label to support instances where we may have multiple buttons with the same name on the page. For example, if you have 5 read more buttons on the page. Adding this ARIA label will give the context to screen readers. So this button will not read more, it will announce read more about dinosaurs. If your app needs to support localization, Adrian Roselli recently wrote a great article with a different pattern that uses the ARIA described by attribute. That article will be shared in the resources. This is an accessible button in JSX. If we want to support tech buttons with icons, we mix in our icon component. And we wrap the button children and that icon with a span for positioning. Notice again, we're using a span, which is an inline element inside this button component. This is because for button elements, you should be only nesting inline level elements. You should not be nesting in block level elements like a p tag or a div. A div, when the computed property of a div is a block level element, you should also not be nesting in other links or other controls, other buttons inside a button element. That is not valid HTML. The JSX is popped into the components render method, and we are going to add some props and an on-click handler and some disabled button support. The one guardrail we're going to add will ensure that if no icon name is passed in to the component, no icon will render in the button. Inputs. Inputs need labels and error messages because labeled inputs give all users more context. And no, placeholders are not labels. Avoid using placeholders instead of labels, otherwise your users will lose context. Placeholders are hard to style across browsers, and placeholders are not auto-translated. Build your input to minimize horizontal scrolling and support screen magnification users. The max input width should be about 80 characters. You should be stacking your input labels above the input and the error messages right below the input in close proximity to each other. This way, when someone zooms in with a screen magnifier, they will always have context on the purpose of that input. This is an accessible input pattern. It's a bit hard to read, so let's zoom in. We start off with our high quality ingredients. This is our semantic HTML. We pair our labels and error messages to the input. And in JSX, we associate the label with the input by pairing the label's HTML4 prop with the input ID's value. We're going to mix in some key ARIA spices for input validation. We're going to add ARIA invalid, ARIA required, and pair that ARIA described by prop with the value provided by the error text ID span. We'll also add an ARIA live attribute instead of to polite to announce the error message to users when they have reached a convenient stopping point in their user flow. To make this more flexible, we're going to mix in disabled attribute support and synthetic event supports to capture keyboard actions like on change and on key press handlers. We're also using the true null handling pattern for all the Boolean props here. Add your guardrails. If the developer does not pass in a label, the whole input will not render, neither will that icon. This will help guide the developer to follow best practices when implementing an input component. And this will soon become second nature whenever using React, any other framework, or straight HTML and JavaScript. Same goes with the error handling. If the developer doesn't pass in both the invalid prop and the error message prop to the component, it won't render. Disclosure widgets. So, disclosure widgets are a very flexible pattern that is an underlying pattern that is can be used for more than one type of interactive component. You think of things like toggle tips, drop downs, toggle menus. And also partially with autocompletes and like custom combo boxes that would simulate a select menu. We're not going to talk about autocomplete or select menus here. We're going to talk about more of just a toggle disclosure and toggle tips, just for brevity. It's also very important to make sure that these widgets are both keyboard and mouse operable, and the functionality of each variation depends on how you use it. And this is why we're not going to talk about autocomplete and select, because those need to support different keyboard interactions in addition to the ones I'm going to show you right now. Also, to be clear, with toggle menus and toggle tips, the interaction is pretty similar. However, remember, a tooltip is not a toggle tip. A tooltip's interaction is you have a little place, and when you hover over it, some popover shows up to give you information, and when you mouse away or focus away, that the little contents go away. That can be very hard for screen magnification users. But a toggle tip, the interactivity revolves around clicking a button to reveal the container and focusing away, or pressing the escape key to close that particular widget. Also, depending on your type of disclosure pattern, you should be able to send focus to the first item in the open container. And I'm going to demo that with a toggle search pattern. There are 3 primary keyboard actions for disclosure widgets. That is the spacebar and enter key, which is provided by default by a semantic HTML button element. And you also should be supporting the escape key and mouse clicks. Now I'm going to hop over to do a quick demo to show you the disclosure widget pattern in Code Sandbox. So this is a disclosure widget pattern in React. So what we want to do here is we have this pattern where we are going to support a bunch of props to pass in to what's going to be rendered down here, because I will go through this one by one. What will be rendered? Come on, scroll. Come over here. There we go. There we go. And view. So you can see all of it. Let's do some word wrap. So what's going to be rendered under the hood is going to be a div. It's being paired with a button component and a div that will accept whatever children you want to pass in here. So going back to the top, what we're going to pass into this disclosure widget to support the button is we're going to pass in these 4 things. We're going to support ARIA labels if we need them. We are going to support class names if we need to override the default look and feel of the button that we've provided. We are going to support whether the button will use an icon, whether the button can be large or small. And then we're going to also support children. We're going to support whether we want to have the disclosure widget to be open like this by default. So we're going to have that prop in here. The first item ref prop will support cases where when you open this widget, focus will go right into an element somewhere in the container here. We're also supporting a way to customize how the icon is sized and positioned and colored, and also if we want to have the button to be an icon-only button. So the state that we are going to establish here is going to set some use state to toggle whether this widget is open or not. We're also going to create a couple refs to support focus management down the road and make this a little more composable and for later on. We are going to have this key up handler here, what this does is, say here, if I'm in the window, if I tab to the button, I focus the button, and the button will open the disclosure widget if I toggle the enter key, or if I toggle the enter key or the spacebar key. That is what this pattern will do. But the key up handler here means if you have the disclosure widget open and you press escape, the disclosure widget will close and focus has returned to the button that has activated the widget from widget opening. So what we're doing here is if you hit escape, we are changing the state, and we are also focusing back to the button that activated this pattern. And here is our handler to toggle whether we are going to open or close the widget. This click outside handler is something that if you tab into your disclosure widget and then you start using your mouse, you can click outside the widget and it will close the pattern. So you are supporting a keyboard interaction like this because what you want to do with it, you want to have that pattern when you are in your use effect hook. You are going to be adding some excuse me, some event listeners when you either have clicked the mouse outside of this widget, or if you have pressed another key, if you have multiple widgets on the page. We are listening for these two events. Also, you're not receiving my screen at all? Yes, yes. Sorry about that. Let's see how it works. All right. Oh, wow. There we go. It just stopped. Okay, ready? And how much did we miss? Okay. Okay, so we missed all of me like demoing the code? Okay, okay. No, I can back up. I'm still on time. I can do this. And I will be sharing this code sandbox later for anyone who wants to pull this apart. That way, nobody misses anything. Okay, so can you see everything now? Excellent. Okay, so this is a disclosure widget pattern. This is a disclosure widget pattern in React. This is what a disclosure widget does. So you can, with your mouse, click on the mouse and it opens the widget. You click away, it closes the widget. You can use the keyboard to tab into the button, and because it's a button, it's using a button element, you can toggle it open and closed using the spacebar key. You can also toggle it open and closed with the enter key because a native button element supports both the spacebar and enter key to click a button as a click handler. You don't even have to add a click handler for that particular type of interaction. Also, a disclosure widget, if I open it, I can also press the escape key to close it, and it will it's returning focus right to this button because my focus state is that black color. So what's great about this, also when I click away, we also close the button and focus is lost, but you don't need to return focus back to this button when you have click events. So I am going to go through this pattern a bit and show you what we're rendering first. This is what we're rendering. This disclosure widget has a div wrapper that has a key up handler. And in this wrapper, you pass in a button component and a div that will be listening for whether the state is open, and then it will show the children, and it has a ref. So the button itself is supporting the following properties, whether the if the, excuse me, it's stubborn to hover over things. If the state is open, which is set up here, we have our state set right here, put it right in the middle. We're using the useState hook to control whether the button will be expanded or collapsed, and the ARIA expanded property on a button is important because that will alert screen readers that whether the button is, if the button is expanded, the screen reader user knows to look for some sort of container that is paired with the button. So we are setting our state here to with a default of whatever default expanded that we pass in here of whether it's open or not. And our default property for that is false. And then if you click it, we can toggle this hook to pass in the state of is open to the opposite state. That is pretty excellent. We also have, I'm going to go top down right now. We have some props that we're supporting for the button. That is, we can pass in an ARIA label to the button. We can pass class names into the button to override the classes. We're using CSS modules here. We can override, we can pass in an icon to the button, whether we want the button to be render as a large or small button, or the default medium size. And we can also pass in the button text. The children is what we're going to pass into the div that is the sibling to the button. That we also support that default expanded prop. This first item ref is a value where we are going to attach to the component inside this div down here in case we want to send focus into any of these contents. And I will demo that in a pattern that I'm going to show, because this is just the behind the scenes component to use that you leverage to make other patterns. So along with the refs, we also have a key up handler because we need to listen for whether the user presses the escape key. So if the user presses the escape key and the widget is open is true, which means the widget is open, we are going to toggle that open to false and send focus back to this button here. And this is the function to toggle the set is open value function. We also have this click outside handler defined. And we are listening for whether either if this button or this content is the target of any of the events, do nothing. But if the user does anything outside of these, we need to manage state. So we take that handler and we attach it to some event listeners. So if the disclosure widget is open, we're listening for mouse up and key up events. And if we have a mouse up event, it will close. The key up event is also there just in case you have many disclosure widgets on the page. It will listen for if any other disclosure widgets are open and you click out, all of them will close. It's an optional pattern that you can use if you want. Also, we have if there's a first item ref passed into the component to send focus right into some element in this widget, that item that we attached will have focus, be immediately focused. And then we do a little bit of cleanup when the component unmounts. So in the JSX, we have the key up handler being passed in here to manage the escape key. We have the button element that we composed prior, which has all the props we added previously, but we also are supporting the ARIA expanded attribute, which is depending on whether the state is open or not. We are supporting that label, passing in a ref. This is how we can pass in some extra classes using it's like a decorator that we've set under the hood to pass in an object of all the classes to modify the CSS, pass in the icon, whether we want this button to be an icon-only button, which needs to also be paired with that ARIA label, and pass in any on-click handlers if you want to use them, and size the button. So this is the widget. But to see this in use, we're going to open the app file, and I'm going to turn on a toggle menu. So you're going to be able to see a toggle menu. I'm going to turn off the disclosure widget so you can see that what I've done here is you can take this pattern here and pass in things and style it completely differently and pass in more elements in here. So I'm going to close this widget out so we have more real estate on this little screen. And I'm going to show you the code for the toggle menu. So in the toggle menu, we set some data, but we bring in that disclosure widget. Let's wrap things. So we bring in the widget, pass in some of our props to that widget. It doesn't need to be that big. Pass in some of the props of like what icon we want to use. Because it's an icon button, we have to pass in an ARIA label, passing in some extra classes to override the styles we provided in that button, and add in some overrides for the styling of the button icon. So what we passed in here is this is an unordered list of buttons. And these buttons are not taking us anywhere outside of this page. We are just using this to do something on this page to set some settings. So in here with our unordered list, we are mapping over a list item and passing in the button. And what is really great about this pattern, we've styled it, and we can just go through these things, and then if you hit escape, focus moves right back to that activator. But you've styled it and you've passed in all that unordered list of buttons. So that's pretty cool for more like a toggle menu. You could do similar things like passing in links to have another different type of like a mobile menu if you want. And I'm going to show you the next thing in our go away toggle menu. Instead of a toggle menu, I'm going to show you a toggle tip, and I will show you the search one last. So the toggle tip, think of the tooltip. There you go. You have a tooltip, and you could have something where you can toggle it open or close with our buttons, but we are styling things and passing in our custom contents. So we are taking this pattern, instead of making it a toggle menu, it's now a toggle tip. So we grab our disclosure widget, making sure we are word wrapping so everyone can see everything. Try again. And you can pass in your labels, your class names, your unordered, and also here your labels, class names, and oops, we don't need an unordered list here because that's invalid. That's not valid. That's not valid. This is valid because you would have wanted a, and here it makes sense to have a div, but here it's still working. Your pattern, you have an accessible pattern here that you can use to learn more about your full list of fruit. Here it will go to Google. Pardon my cat that's meowing in the background. He will not be denied. But this is a toggle tip. Now, moving over to the toggle search, this is where I'm going to demonstrate that first item ref is true. Should have been here. Stand by. Actually, it is in there. So in toggle search, you don't need that first item ref. In toggle search, this pattern here, if you notice, when you opened it, search, the focus went right into this input. This is because we added a pattern in in the disclosure widget that if we passed in we have a use ref that passes in focus to this input. And why this is important is maybe you do have a search pattern, like a little search menu where you don't want to force the user to go right into that input. This is a common pattern you see in UX. So this is a nice little feature that we added with our disclosure widget. So let me just show you this really quick in here. And making sure we toggle word wrap. Is it working? Is it already wrapping? It is not. Okay. Toggle word wrap. I will set the settings later. So in here, in our disclosure widget, we are passing in use ref of null here in our search pattern. And then we're going to pass it into the widget. And then we have a form that receives that first item ref. And so we have an input of type of search. We've input of type of search with an icon, and we have a button that's an activator button. And what's great about this is now you have a toggle search pattern. So that disclosure widget allows you to do 3 different patterns and even more that you can use that will support the opening and closing the button, hitting escape to manage focus, and if you have things like more than one of these items on the page, make this smaller, you can do this, where you can go through the things, and then you're starting to tab through things, and look, you can tab along the page, and it starts activating all your items just by using the tab key, the space bar, the enter key, and the escape key. So I'm going to go back to sharing. Is my screen still shared, by the way? Double checking before I move back to the slides. Everything's fine? Okay, cool. Okay, good. All right, so moving back over here. Documentation. Those massive design systems out there definitely have some drool-worthy patterns for us to dream about. If your team is small, though, showing examples of the many ways your components can be used is a good first step while you scale your system. When we were rebooting our docs, we initially used Gatsby for our style guide to leverage the power of MDX. And we used Storybook to document our component playground. And we deployed our static instances of our docs using Zeitz Now, which is now called Vercel, and now has ruined every single pun I can make about the Now software. So I can do that later. Anyway, touching upon Storybook for a moment. Storybook is a great way to sandbox your components in isolation and play with the UI logic without the complexities of business logic. Storybook now supports MDX, which is glorious. And that means you can combine usage guidelines and component playground in one place in Storybook. The accessibility add-on in Storybook is a must here. The accessibility add-on uses the Axe core engine under the hood and does a quick audit of all your components and compares it against the WCAG 2.1 success criteria. The plugin, the add-on, identifies errors, tells you how serious they are, and gives you steps to fix them before you start your manual accessibility testing. While documenting your components, you should add helpful hints to help developers choose how to implement your components. For example, how to create an informative icon or a decorative icon. Be sure to add props tables to your components so your developers know which prop does what and whether it's required. Be sure to add those component do's and don'ts. Those are essential because you can create accessible components, but you could also potentially be using an accessible component inaccessibly. So component do's and don'ts. Dedicate a page to accessibility resources. The WCAG success criteria is really intense to parse. If you have curated any articles that help explain how to implement common accessibility patterns, add those to your docs. So to wrap up, our users are diverse. Your design system is a cookbook. Cookbooks have a personality. React is a kitchen utensil, and you are the cook. Components are your tried and true recipes. WCAG is your reference material. And document, document, document. And remember, dinosaurs are always the hotness. Thank you.
Thank you, Kathleen. We're applauding to you, and we hope you hear virtual applause in your honor. That's all we can provide, unfortunately, for now.
I'm good with that.
Great. So, yeah, we have a few questions for you. In the beginning of your talk, you were discussing the phone, the icon component,
Yes.
and you suggested to use icon phones. Why not creating same components with SVG, for example?
Okay, so why I did that is because we were originally using SVGs. We were using them, we had about 100 SVGs, and we combined them into a sprite sheet, and we were referencing that sprite sheet, and it was great. But then we started testing, and when we were testing on Mac, the Mac version, it was a Mac OS High Sierra, and we were testing in VoiceOver. Safari had this bug where it would start announcing, even if we put an ARI hidden attribute on the whole sprite sheet, Safari would ignore it and start announcing 100 icons on the page, even when we weren't using it. So we were going to be forcing screen reader users to listen to 100 groups before actually reading everything else on the page. So because we were a small team, we had to do something, we had to keep moving and figure out how to solve it later. We moved on and just converted everything to font with the plans on using SVGs later, because SVGs are great. They are. I love them.
Okay, I wouldn't thought of this kind of solution to use font icons without, instead of SVG, but that's a great case. I think that's the real world.
Yes.
As a developer, learn something, then try that doesn't work.
Right. It's you want your system. Yes. Okay.
Yeah. Can you recommend any UI libraries that have accessibility in mind and built with having it?
Yes. Reach UI is doing a pretty good job of making some accessible components. Let me think of some other ones. So Reach UI, and I'll put that in the links. Let me see. I'm scrolling through. Grommet, Grommet, Grommet UI. That is another one that you can use. They build their components with accessibility in mind. You know what? My screen is still sharing over on the left side.
No, but
okay.
Now it's sharing.
Okay, yeah.
Okay. I think it's. This is Grommet. This one will.
Okay.
Grommet. Welcome to my Google history. And Reach UI. So these two are good places to get started. Oh, another one, but they're still working on it because they have a lot of errors in the CLI about CSS variables. So Adobe Spectrum, they have React components now, and they have hooks. So. So yeah, so they have, so look up React Spectrum. So this is an accessible UI library that the Adobe team just released in August. So they have some really good things for they have some libraries and some hooks that you can use. And they also have really great documentation because they have a really big team that can talk about, what you should be doing with your components.
What about the popular libraries like Material UI or for React or Bootstrap for React? Like a library that a lot of people are using.
Notice how I didn't bring those up.
Yeah, that's why I'm asking.
Okay, so I have to dig into them more, but in the past they have just not done a great job. I think I hear that Bootstrap is doing better, so I have to take a closer look again to see if they're getting it right. But like Material UI, like material design as a system is great, but Material UI has not been great for accessibility. I will double check again, but I want to vet them a little more carefully before saying any of those two names again.
Okay. Okay, thank you. I think we have to, again, thank you for your amazing talk.